Well, good morning, everyone. Certainly want to thank everybody for coming here. This is a big day for our committee, both of our committees, as well as for the GAO. Unfortunately, Senator Carper's train's been delayed, and Congressman Cummings is walking over, but we'll get started so we stay on time. This is a big day from the standpoint of our committee because so much of our work really does end up relying on the good work of Comptroller General Gene Dodaro and the Government Accountability Office. Since 1990, the GAO has been publishing its high risk list. And I asked my staff to check into, what kind of savings do we realize from the GAO's recommendation. And just in the last 2 years, the federal government has, through efficiencies and through better effectiveness because of GAO's recommendation, has saved $40 billion. I mean, that's a significant savings. As we were assembling our staff for this chairmanship, I did ask one of my staff members to go into the GAO reports and start reviewing those, and I went on the website to just really kind of narrow down what were the reports I really wanted to highlight, and I noticed there were 52,942 reports. And so I gave my staff member that task. How far are you on that one, Patrick? Yeah, he's working his way through it. But the GAO is, again, such an important organization. Here's Congressman Cummings. Come on up here, sir. Good morning. How you doing? GAO is just so important in terms of the work we do, and the high risk list is all about identifying agencies and areas of the government that are vulnerable to waste, to fraud, to abuse, to mismanagement. And again, it's all about providing recommendations for greater effectiveness and efficiency. This year, unfortunately, there are some new agencies, new areas that are added to the list. One is VA healthcare, and I'll come back and talk about that a little bit. Also, information technology acquisition. They've expanded their work on tax code enforcement and fraud, and also on cybersecurity. That'll be a top priority of our committee, is working on cybersecurity bill. But they also have some good news. They've narrowed their focus on Department of Defense contracting management and also on FDA oversight of medical devices. And I'm also pleased to report that DHS management, the focus on that one is being narrowed and getting close to being taken off the list, hopefully. So I did want to point out, though, one of the troubling aspects of this report really is VA healthcare, and this hits pretty close to home here in Wisconsin. We've had, over the last couple of years, in one facility, the Thomas facility in Wisconsin, we've had 3 deaths of veterans. Two over the last couple of years related to overprescription of opiate drugs, and just last month, a veteran, 74 years old, basically died in neglect. He was taken to the facility with symptoms of a stroke, waited for 3 hours, had a stroke, was put into an examination room, waited another 45 minutes, never got the anticoagulant drug, was transported to Gunnison Lutheran, where he died a couple days later. So what's troubling about the GAO high risk report on VA healthcare is they have been making recommendations. The GAO has been making recommendations on VA healthcare for a number of years. More than 100 of those recommendations have not been implemented, about 80%. And so this has really got to be a focus. This is extremely important that we provide the health care to the finest among us that they actually deserve. So I'm hoping that the VA starts taking the GAO's recommendations seriously. And I'll just close by saying I think what our committee can do, and what hopefully Congressman Chaffetz's and Congressman Cummings' committee can do, is try and figure out a process to make sure that the GAO recommendations are actually implemented. We can write all these reports, but the agencies actually have to pay attention, and they have to implement these reports. If they do, the government is far better off. It can become more efficient, more effective, and that's a goal that we all share. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Chaffetz.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate the good work Senator Johnson and those in the Senate are doing. We've got a great working relationship, and it's very important that the House and Senate work together on these issues. I also really appreciate the relationship that I have with Elijah Cummings in the partnership that we have. We're not going to see eye to eye on every issue, but we are going to work together. And certainly as we tackle waste, fraud, and abuse, that is not a purely partisan issue. That is something that we collectively do need to work on. To the men and women of the GAO, we cannot thank you enough for the great work that you do. Congress can't do its job if the GAO doesn't do their job. And there are thousands of people who dedicate themselves to the good hard work, the analysis, and the recommendations that we rely on in Congress to make sure that we're improving government and we're improving the responsibilities and that we have to taxpayers. And that's what it's all about. It's about making government more efficient, more effective, more responsive to the American people. And so this report we rely on heavily, and we do appreciate the good work that our comptroller has done, Mr. Dodaro. We really do appreciate it. In the House, I can tell you, oversight and government reform, we're supposed to not only be highlighting through oversight, but we're also supposed to be introducing the reforms necessary. Of deep concern are the 6 different programs in 5 different agencies that are on the 25-year list. We're having the silver anniversary for 6 of these programs. That is totally unacceptable. So today at 2 o'clock in the House, Mr. Dodaro is going to come testify, and then panel 2, we've invited those agencies to come and try to explain themselves. 25 years on the list is wholly unacceptable. I'm interested. Mr. Dodaro can expand on this, but to get off the list, there are 5 criteria: leadership commitment, agency capacity, an action plan, monitoring efforts, and progress. It doesn't say that the whole thing has to be wiped out and solved, but those are achievable goals. For agencies to be on the list after 25 years, we got to solve that problem. We can't keep bringing them back year after year after year. These reports mean something. They need to be responsive. So today we'll hear from the IRS about Medicare. We'll talk to the DOD. They have 2 on the list, the Department of Energy and as well as NASA. So we look forward to that as well. Again, to the good work from the men and women in the GAO, this is not a one-off hearing. This is something we need to work on throughout the 114th Congress, and we'll do so in a bipartisan and bicameral way. And so thank you, Senator, for having us and hosting us here.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank you, Congressman Chavis, Mr. Dodaro, and I'm sure Senator Carper will be here soon. I just wanted to take a moment again to thank the employees of the GAO. I've said it quite often, our federal employees so often are talked about in a very negative way, but I've been a staunch supporter of our federal employees because they bring so much to the table and make such a big difference. And the GAO report is one such excellent product. But you know, you can have motion, commotion, emotion, and no results. That's what Senator Johnson was talking about, and Congressman Chaffetz. It's time that we do something that actually takes these things off the list. I was very pleased to see that, well, pleased and not pleased to see cybersecurity on that list. It's clear that we have to address this issue, and Senator Johnson, I was very glad to hear you say that this is something that your committee would be taking on. Cybersecurity affects our constituents on a day-to-day basis. If it does not affect them directly, it makes them feel vulnerable. It opens up their private lives to so many, many hackers. And we've got to address that issue. But overall, everywhere I go, I try to tell the American people, I got your back, that I got your back. And every time I say that, every time I say it, I get a standing ovation, because that's what the American people want. They want to know that we come in here and that we not only keep government straight and make sure that government is doing the right thing and has a very high standard, and as Senator Johnson said, operates in an effective and efficient manner, but they also want to know that governors make a difference in their lives. And when you go to the various recommendations that GAO have recommended, and Mr. Dodaro will talk about this afternoon, most of those things go to changing the trajectory of people's destinies. And that's what this is all about. And so I'm going to work, and I'm very pleased that we have a good relationship with the chairman. It's refreshing, to be very frank with you. I think we are going to be able to accomplish many, many things. But I always remind my colleagues that we are only in these positions for a short period of time, whether it's 5 years or whether it's 100 years. And during that time, it is up to us to make a difference. And there is no better guiding light than the GAO report. So the question now is, do we use that light to make a difference? Or do we put it on the shelf and wait till next year and complain that the things haven't been done? Or do we make a difference in people's lives? And I would submit to you that with the bicameral relationship that we now have, I think we'll be able to achieve a lot. And so, again, I want to thank you. I'm going to look forward to our committee meeting this evening. I want to thank Mr. Chaffetz for agreeing already to many of the things that we are concerned about on the Democratic side, and all of those things that we have asked to be considered, some of which come from the list, are things that go to the center of people's lives. And thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be invited here today to this press conference to talk about our update of the high risk list, which we do at the beginning of each new Congress. This year, we're showing and reporting solid, steady progress in the majority of the areas on the high risk list. As been mentioned, we have introduced a new feature this year where we're rating each of the high risk areas on the 5 criteria that Congressman Chaffetz enumerated. Leadership commitment, where they have the capacity, the people, the resources to actually fix the problem, where they have a good corrective action plan that addresses the root causes of the problem, and they can monitor it over time. They need a monitoring effort, and they need to demonstrate progress. They really don't need to have it 100% fixed, but they have to demonstrate tangible results in fixing the problem and on the road to ultimate solutions. While, as been mentioned, 6 of the original 14 areas from 1990 are still on the high-risk list. 1/3 of the areas we've added over time have been able to come off of the high-risk list through concentrated efforts, support from the Congress, legislation, et cetera. It is a bit of an urban legend that if you get on the GAO high-risk list, you can never come off. There are areas that have come off. None are coming off this update, however. But of the 30 areas that were on the list, 18 have at least partially met all 5 criteria. And 11 of those 18 have fully met one of the criteria or more and partially met the others. As been mentioned, we're narrowing the focus on 2 areas: FDA's oversight of medical devices. In that area, they have fully implemented our recommendations in the recall area. Before, they were not focused on the recall area enough. They are now consistently applying their criteria for recalls. They're ensuring that the explicit criteria that they have for what needs to be done during the recall is actually followed through, and they're documenting it. They're analyzing 10 years of trends in recall data so that they can provide better guidance and support to the industry in these areas. They've also implemented fully a new law that allowed approval of new devices to go through a dual-track process. If the device was similar to devices already approved, it could go through an expedited process. If it wasn't, it had to go through a more stringent process. They were slow to implement this law. They've now, by 2015, they're on track to fully implement the legislation. There are 2 aspects of that area that are still important. One is oversight to improve their ability to manage the safety of drugs in a global marketplace. Most of the drugs that we have now, 80% of the ingredients for active drugs, 40% of finished drugs, half of medical devices, come from 150 countries around the world. So they need to pivot from overseeing domestic production to overseeing global production, and also focus on drug shortages, which are still a problem. Congress has passed some legislation in this area, but it needs to be attended to. In defense contract management area, we're narrowing the focus. They finally have oversight over the contracting tools and techniques to use less risky contracts when it's appropriate, but they still need to make improvements in oversight in their acquisition workforce, services acquisition, which are growing as a proportion of their acquisitions, and also operational contract support, where they're using contractors in theater to help carry out and execute military operations. While we've noted progress, there are 2 areas that are coming on the high-risk list. As has been noted, VA healthcare is on the list. We've grouped our findings over the years into 5 areas that are real problems: ambiguous policies and inconsistent processes, inadequate oversight and accountability, information technology challenges, inadequate training of VA staff, and unclear resource needs and allocation priorities. As Senator Johnson mentioned, we have over 100 recommendations that we've made that have not yet been fully implemented. Congress has passed legislation to help address this area, but it needs to be effectively implemented. VA has been given an additional $15 billion. We want to make sure, and one of the reasons we're putting it on the list is that that money goes to proper use and actually helps remedy the problem. The other new area that we're putting on the list are IT acquisitions and operations, both new systems, but also how they're managing existing legacy systems. Over $58 billion of the $80 billion each year actually go to support ongoing systems and operations, and we're concerned that's not being managed effectively. As it relates to new areas, we provide a litany of failed government efforts that, after millions, in some cases billions of dollars and several years of development, have been canceled. There's a lot of cost growth and schedule slippages in other areas, and ultimately, in many cases, the systems are developed with less functionality than intended, and therefore don't make a real improvement in execution of the mission of the agencies. In this area, over just the last 5 years alone, we've made 737 recommendations. Only 23% of those have been fully implemented. Congress has passed late last year, with sponsorship of both the Senate and House committees that are represented here today, new legislation to help in the IT reform area. It's called the FITARA legislation, and it gives CIOs more authority and puts a number of other tools and techniques in place that we think would be helpful. But again, it needs to be executed properly. Congress has done its job in both the VA cases and the IT area, but it's up to the agencies now to successfully execute. Lastly, 2 areas we're expanding, which we've done over time as circumstances change. First is in the tax enforcement area, tax administration. We have been focused on the tax gap, which right now the annual estimate's $385 billion. But fraud due to identity theft has been growing. Last year, IRS stopped, they estimate, about $24 billion in potential fraud, and they missed about $5.8 billion. So we're concerned. We have a number of recommendations that we'll be talking about with Congress for some potential legislative fixes in this area and things that IRS could do. Lastly, in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection, we put computer security across the federal government as a high-risk list in 1997. It was the first time we ever said anything across the entire federal government was high risk. In 2003, we added critical infrastructure protection to that because most of the computer assets are in the private sector hands, and the government needs to have a partnership with the private sector to protect critical infrastructure systems, and more of them have become reliant on computer technology, whether you're talking about the electricity grid or the operations of our financial markets. But the other dimension that's really come into the forefront recently that we're adding is the focus on privacy and protecting personally identifiable information. The number of incidents has more than doubled in the last 5 years to over 27,000. So that's just reports by the federal agencies of incidents involving personally identifiable information. There have been obvious high-profile incidents in the private sector as well. Privacy laws were passed initially in 1974. They need to be updated. And we have a number of suggestions both for the Congress and the executive branch agencies. So we look forward and appreciate both committees holding hearings on this subject, and we look forward to working with the Congress and the agencies to come off the list. I would note some of the progress that we've seen has been due to top leadership commitment in the agencies and by OMB, and of course by the many of my great colleagues at GAO with the hard work. So I want to publicly thank everyone for their support, and Congress has passed a number of important legislative initiatives which we outlined in our report. So thank you very much.
Before we open it up for questions, I see that our ranking member, Senator Tom Carper, has arrived. Before I call him up here, I just had a couple more comments. You'll notice that there seems to be a fair amount of bipartisan agreement of really how important GAO's work is, and that's true, and that's a good sign. If we're going to really accomplish things for the American people, like Ranking Member Cummings was talking about, it's good to concentrate on the things we agree on, and we have a real good opportunity in both of our committees to do just that. Working with Senator Carper, we've actually developed a mission statement for our committee. It's pretty simple. It's to enhance the economic and national security of America. And GAO is a key part of that. Now Senator Carper and I, we may not agree on how big the government ought to be, but we fully agree on that what government we have should be efficient, should be effective, and we are committed to working together to trying to accomplish exactly that. So with that, Senator Carper.
Please hold your applause. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Jason, welcome. Always nice to be with you and my friend Elijah, and to Gene as well. Notice Gene Dodaro, when he speaks, he uses copious notes. Never looks at the audience, and I've been with him I don't know how many times over the last dozen or so years, and I've never seen him use one note to say anything, and everything flows so smoothly, and something we all aspire to be better at. But not only is he a great presenter of information and important information in a way that I can understand, and I think most people can understand and appreciate, he provides great leadership for thousands of folks who work at the General Accountability Office and do wonderful work, important work for our country. I used to be state treasurer a long time ago, and came to Congress for a while, and if anything I focused on, it was deficit reduction. I've always been interested in how do we get better results for less money. Did the same thing as governor of Delaware. In those 8 years, we had 8 years of balanced budgets. 7 years we cut taxes, paid down some of our debt, and earned up earning AAA credit ratings for the state of Delaware for the first time in the history of our state. And I bring that spirit of really the spirit of a recovering governor here to my work in the United States Senate with members of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee and with our friends in the House of Representatives. People ask me sometimes, they say, what do you like most about your work? And there's a lot of things I enjoy about my work. Sometimes I don't enjoy the commute so much from Wilmington to Washington when the trains aren't working. But that's one of your primary recommendations that really struck home with me this morning is that we have some work to do with the Congress with respect to making sure that we're investing appropriately in our transportation system for this nation. And I would certainly amen that to today. But I focus hugely on deficit reduction, and one of the things that we need to do, really three things we need to do in order to continue to reduce our budget deficits. They're down by about 2/3 from where they were 4 or 5 years ago, but there's more work that needs to be done. First thing we need to do is entitlement reform that saves these programs, saves money in these programs, saves these programs for future generations, and does not harm older people or poor people. Number two, we need comprehensive tax reform that broadens our base, lowers our rates, especially on the corporate side, and also provides at least some monies for deficit reduction. The third thing we need to do is to look at everything we do in government from A to Z, and ask this question: how do we get a better result for less money? You all heard the old saying, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. The great thing about GAO and the work that Gene and his folks do is they give us a path. Oh, they give us actually several paths. But all of them lead to providing service to the people of this country in a more cost-effective way. It's critically important work, especially when you have a budget deficit that's still expected this year to exceed $400 billion. I remember meeting with Joe Lieberman. I'd just been elected. I was governor of Delaware. I'd just been elected to the U.S. Senate, and I met with Joe Lieberman, and we're talking about committee assignments and committees that I might want to aspire to serve on. He said, you ought to get on governmental affairs, and you'd like that. As an old treasurer, governor, he said, that's be right up your alley. And we talked a good deal about it, and I really thank him for that recommendation. Later on, we became Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. But every day, we can make progress toward providing the taxpayers of this country a better return on their investment. Every now and then, I talk to folks who pay taxes in this country, and a lot of people do. And sometimes people say, I don't mind paying taxes, I just don't want you to waste our money. I don't mind paying taxes, I just don't want you to waste my money. I don't want to waste their money either. And with the help of GAO, we're going to waste a whole lot less, and we have been, in fact, a whole lot less. Gene's mentioned a whole bunch of areas. I'll just mention a couple of critical ones. We're actually seeing progress being made. We're seeing progress being made in the Department of Homeland Security, which actually has had clean audits not 1, but 2 years in a row. What you can't measure, you can't manage, and DHS is making real progress. We're proud of that work and know it needs to continue. Even in the Department of Defense, progress is being made in terms of supply management and work that they're doing in contracts and work with respect to other aspects of their job. That work needs to continue, but it's encouraging. Ash Carter is expected to be confirmed this week as Secretary of the Department of Defense, and I'll be speaking with him either later this week or later this month. And one of the focuses I'll have with him is continue the work that Leon Panetta and Chuck Hagel and others have begun in the leadership of your department. And the last thing I'd say is this, leverage. I love the word leverage. I love to find ways to achieve leverage. When Tom Coburn and I were leading a subcommittee of this committee for a number of years, Committee on Financial Management, we realized, it didn't take us long to realize, if we could somehow leverage our effectiveness with GAO, working off of the high risk list from GAO, working with the inspector generals, working with nonprofit groups, we could actually get a lot done. Work with our colleagues in the House, work with the administration, work with OMB, we can get a whole lot done. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And for the last 2 years, Tom and I did that, Tom Coburn and I did that, leading the full committee, and I look forward to doing that with Ron and working with Elijah and Jason as well. A lot has been accomplished. A lot still needs to be done. And by working together, we're going to achieve that. Thank you. And now, let's just open it up to your questions, please. Anyone?
Here's one right here.
Go ahead and identify yourself again, please. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for coming and asking a question. I'll just mention a couple of them. My lesson coming out of the election were really 3 lessons. 1, voters want us to work together. 2, they want us to get things done. 3, they want us to do things to help strengthen the economic recovery of this country. A big contributor to economic growth is a modern 21st century transportation system, and we desperately need one. And we're finding it difficult to muster the courage, the resolve to actually fully address this issue, this need. We're getting another nudge from Gene and his folks. We need to do our job. And I've been working with a bunch of our colleagues, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, the administration, even into last night, to try to provide a little bit of leadership on my own. That is a critical thing. And I want to just say very much thanks to Gene for highlighting that and reminding us we have a job to do. We need to do it. And let me yield to others.
One thing that I've always been concerned is DOD and the ability to count what they're spending and for us to be able to have some accountability. I was just double checking with Mr. Dodaro, and they still are having the problems that they've been having. I think that we need to stay on top of that. It's we spend a lot of money in DOD, and I think the American people would be a bit surprised if they knew of the issues that we have there.
Let me just make the point, because I kind of got distracted earlier. There's no doubt about the fact that we have to make sure we implement these recommendations. And obviously, when somebody's been on the high-risk list for 25 years, it means they're not implementing the recommendations. Oftentimes we talk about cutting government, and we're really not talking about cutting. We're just reducing the rate of growth and spending. GAO is an agency we've actually cut. In 2010, their budget was $556 million. 2013, it was $480 million. Last year was $522 million. Now, I'm a fiscal conservative, but when you see that GAO saved $40 billion because of its recommendations just over the last 2 years, this is an agency that we shouldn't short shrift. This is an agency we should fund, and I think if we would do that, if we can develop some kind of implementation process to their good work, I think that's how you get people off those 25-year lists.
Yeah, there's just a couple areas. Obviously, they're all important on the list, but DOD occupies a special place. They have about 8 different areas on the list. So, and particularly given the fiscal challenges of dealing with our deficit and debt situation, they need to continue to make improvements and accelerate improvements if they are going to have better business practices that more efficiently carry out their activities, because if they don't, it ultimately shrifts the warfighter in terms of what's delivered to our military to carry out their responsibilities. So it has real consequences, dollars and cents. I'm very concerned about Medicare and Medicaid issues. The amount of improper payments has increased this past year to $124 billion. Of improper payments. These are payments that were made in the wrong amounts or shouldn't have been made at all. Medicare and Medicaid have increasing. They're about half of the improper payments. And if you add the improper payments and estimated problems in the earned income tax credit, that's 75% of the improper payments. Now, I'm worried about Medicare and Medicaid because they're the fastest growing federal programs. And if we don't get a handle on eliminating these improper payments, the problem will get bigger, not smaller, over time. And then lastly, I'd mention we've had on the list for a while financing our nation's transportation infrastructure. That's a real important area that Congress needs to attend to. I know there's a lot of discussions on it, but we have an aging infrastructure, and we need to make proper investments and find a stable funding source for that area.
Any other questions? Sir.
I have one on the improper payments issue. I'm Tony Cassidy with Bloomberg News. Both Senator Scarper and Johnson got this information from OMB apparently a couple of days ago. What are you going to do to dig into why the increase? It went up from $105 billion last year to $125 this year. That's a heck of a jump.
It will, by the way, be a focus. Senator Rand Paul will chair the subcommittee that's really going to be looking into waste, fraud, abuse, duplicated programs, that type of thing. I think one of the more revealing Inspector General's reports really was from the tax department that showed just the earned income tax credit. I don't know the earlier figures, but there was one address where you had, I think, 26,000, approximately, I have this off the top of my head, about 26,000 claims of credit for about $46 million to one address. Now that is ridiculous. So now this is something, again, the American taxpayer does expect us to spend their money wisely, and we need to do everything we can to eliminate that fraud. We will be holding hearings on that. That's a huge focus of Senator Paul's subcommittee.
We just mentioned 26,000 checks going to one address. We don't do that anymore. We put a cap in place. I think the cap is, the max is 3. It used to be that people go to the pharmacy shop and use Medicaid money in order to obtain controlled substances and basically sell them as part of the illegal drug market. We don't let people do that anymore. You got to choose one pharmacy, and that's the pharmacy that you'll be using. There are it's a little bit like playing whack-a-mole at Rehoboth Beach, at Funland. And as soon as you knock down one fraud and one abuse, another one pops up. This is it doesn't really stop. And Tom Coburn and I started working on this, gosh, about 6 years ago. First bill that we passed, maybe even more than 6 years ago. First bill that we passed said, basically, federal agencies, we want you to identify improper payments. That's what we first said. George W. Bush was president. So they started identifying improper payments. And later on, we passed another piece of legislation that said, we want you to not only identify improper payments, but we want you to stop making them. All right, so, and then later on, a third piece of legislation was enacted. It said, not only do we want you to identify improper payments and stop making them, we want you to recover money that has been improperly paid, and we want you to recognize and promote employees, supervisors, on the basis, in part, because of their commitment to improper payments. All that is in place. There's still a lot going on. I will say this. For the first half a dozen years or so after we passed our first act, improper payments went up, 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 up. It peaked out at about $120 billion or so. And then they began coming down. And the reason why they're going up is that agencies were identifying improper payments. That's why more and more and more. And as they identified them, they went up. And then the numbers started coming down until this year, until this last year. The one that concerns me the most is Medicare. It's Medicare. It went up by $15 billion. And I've talked to Sylvia Matthews-Burwell, Secretary of the Department, talked with Beth Colbert, who's a deputy over at OMB, say we got to get on this and work it. Tom Coburn, I'll mention his name one last time. And Tom and I introduced in the last Congress something called the PRIME Act, PRIME. Had 25 co-sponsors here in the Senate, and mostly we focus on improper payments with respect to Medicare and Medicaid. We never got it. We got it through. It was actually in the SGR bill. It was attached to the SGR bill on the doc fix. Could not get that passed. And this year we're going to move it again. We'll probably move it by itself, and we're going to invite Chairman Chaffetz, and we're going to invite Ranking Member Cummings to join us in introducing. Maybe we can jointly introduce that legislation and get it done. That'll help. It won't solve the whole problem, but it'll help further reduce the improper payments, and we need to.
Okay, once again, I just want to thank all my colleagues and all of you for coming here. The hearing starts in about 5 minutes, so thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we're good. We're good.
Are you good?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll see you in a minute. Thank you.